Okay, now that we got that boring work out of the way, let's select our object here, and as you know, we want to use the luminous intensity value to adjust the brightness of our actual locator appearance itself. And if you'll recall, when we selected this locator, we set its display properties, and we clicked on Add Draw Options, and under that we set the wireframe and fill colors to User, and then we added these yellow colors, right? Well, I'm reviewing that because if we look in the channels for that object, we can scroll down and we will see that there are some channels called wireframe RGB and fill color RGB, and those would not be there had we not manually adjusted the color here, so keep that in mind. Now, let's go to our assemblies. I'm going to jump in to our light poly assembly group. Okay, and let's expand this up and just look at that locator, just so we can see that right up there. And now we're going to use our luminous intensity to control the brightness of this color, right? Well, okay, so let's just mess with that a little bit. First of all, let's grab our controls item. We're going to go down here and find its wireframe and fill color RGB, drag those out, and it's going to add them to the controls item here in the schematic viewport. Now that's going to be problematic because ultimately we're going to be using these controls to control the color of this thing, and our spaghetti is going to get really ugly if we have to connect backwards in our list. So let's select all of these channels, right click, and say Separate Channel. Now those guys are in a separate little window. I can move over here. They're still a part of the same item, mind you. If I select one, it selects the other. It's just that they're now separate in our schematic, which is going to make things read a little bit easier. It's just going to be cleaner to look at. So now we want for our luminous intensity to control the brightness of our colors, and for that we're going to need our new assembly. So let's go to our assemblies and find our new brightness guy. And importantly, I'm going to take this, I'm not going to double click it, alright? I'm going to drag it directly into the assembly. If I don't drag it and drop it into the assembly, there's a chance it won't get saved out with the assembly when we save this out. So that's kind of an important point. Alright, so we need a brightness. We're also going to need a map values, which we have here. I'll bring that out. And we're going to need a color, right? We need a color to get us started with this. And so why don't we actually just use the color from our Kelvin, right? So the color of the locator will be the same color as the Kelvin value. So we'll just take that and make that our input RGB. So we'll say our input RGB is going to come from our Kelvin. And then we're going to apply a brightness value to it, and that's going to come out as our fill color. And there it is. Now it looks really, really bright, right? So let's apply a brightness value to that just to figure this out. I'm going to select my input brightness channel here. Actually, I think I have to go to my groups tab, expand this new group. We'll grab our brightness object here. And then I'm going to select the input brightness and just manually, let's set that to 0.5. And it actually, I don't know if you could see that, but it actually got brighter. It went all the way up to white. Now if we set this down to negative 0.5, suddenly it gets really dark because we've subtracted. So what we want to do is actually make this darker, not brighter, right? We kind of want to subtract brightness from this, not add brightness to it. So we'll go to our assemblies here, jump in here, and so that's what we need to do. We need to subtract some value from this brightness. So we want to map between 0 and 7, we think, right? But we need to be subtracting. So actually, we want to map between 7 and 0. Okay, so let's start with 7 in A1. A2 will be 0, because then we're going to do B1 will be 0, and B2 will be negative 1. That way, we're mapping between 7 and 0, between 0 and negative 1. So as we get, because we're really dark, it's going to subtract a lot. And then as we drag up, it's going to subtract less and less. All right, so let's go back to, let's just hop up here. Hop up one level. We'll take that output value, and we'll just take that and bring it into our brightness for this guy. And now, you'll see out here, if I select this guy, and I adjust the luminous intensity, it gets brighter and darker, just like we wanted. Now, it's going to be pretty dark even at low levels. But that's okay. If you wanted to mess with that, you could. Now, in terms of the wireframe color, that's going to be exactly the same color. We're just going to do a different brightness operation on it. So let's go back to our assembly. We'll take our brightness, we'll drag that out here. Boom, right there. Now we need those same RGB values, and you gotta keep adjusting the spaghetti just so that it stays readable. Otherwise, things are going to get real ugly. It can very quickly get difficult to read what's going on if you're not careful. All right, so let's take these RGB values from our Kelvin, drop those into our brightness here. And then in terms of the actual brightness, let's do the same thing. I'm gonna set these outputs first of all to go to the wireframe RG and B. Okay, so we want to take this output value and just make it even darker so that the wireframe ends up darker, right? So let's subtract. Let's subtract a little bit from that so it's even darker. We'll go to Add Modifier, Math, Basic Math, Subtract, right? We'll take that output value from our brightness, same one that we used for the color, except we're going to subtract a value from it. Let's subtract, say, 0.1 from that. So it's even darker. We're taking that brightness value that we calculated, we made it even darker than before, and now I'm going to make that the input brightness for our wireframe, and boom. Now we have a wireframe that's darker than the color. We'll take this guy. If I adjust the luminous intensity, it gets brighter, right? If I adjust the Kelvin, it's going to change colors to be either really orange or really blue, and that gives us a really good idea of what color our light is and how bright it is out in our viewport. Excellent. So obviously all of this is completely unnecessary. However, I find it really useful. You don't have to do it if you don't want to, and in fact, all you have to do is use my preset when I upload it if you don't want to do all this work. All right, let's move on.